Hello everybody and welcome to, well, if you're in the UK or anywhere in the world that celebrates it, to a special Boxing Day edition of an In Search of Tomorrow watch party. As always, I'm Andrew and I'm joined by our superstar director of In Search of Darkness, parts 1, 2 and upcoming 3, and of course what we're all here for to talk about, In Search of Tomorrow as well. Welcome, David.
Hey everybody, happy day after Christmas and happy Boxing Day and happy Black Hole afternoon.
Exactly. So for everyone listening, our sync point will be where the screen says distributed by Buena Vista Distribution Co. Incorporated, which is about 2.5 minutes in, depending on the release. Now, before we start, let's talk about this, David, because this is a very interesting thing, and this harks back to the, I don't want to say the olden days of Hollywood, but it does hark back to an earlier generation of Hollywood, where these big studio films would have a proper score and an overture would play before the movie.
And an overture, which is basically there is no movie yet, so you're sitting there. It's kind of I came in at the tail end of this practice, so when I saw the Black Hole itself on the big screen in 1979, because I'm of that age. I remember, it's like the people still settling in their seats and bringing in their popcorn. Of course, I was ready and primed to go. And I remember thinking, when's the movie starting? And it was only, about 2.5 minutes, but it felt like 10 minutes because I was just like, let's get going. And, it was John Barry's score. It was the overture. It gave you a real taste of what was to come. But there was nothing on the screen, and you just sat there twiddling and wondering.
Well, exactly. I was just discussing this with you before we started. I've got a Blu-ray release of this, and my Blu-ray release doesn't have the overture on it. But I thought today when I'd recap it, I didn't want to go get the Blu-ray out of the cupboard. I thought I'll watch this on Disney+. Put it on Disney+. It's the original theatrical version. And after about 30 seconds, I was there fiddling with the settings in Disney Plus, thinking, there's no picture.
There's no disclaimer.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have a disclaimer. I mean, some of the amazing community members have been showing me that on certain releases they have inserted a card to tell people this. It makes me wonder if this was re-released, theatrically now, and they didn't forewarn people. How long into it would people be coming out, getting the attendants, saying there's no picture?
Yes, and I wouldn't be surprised that many have tried to watch this movie on Disney Plus and have not made it to the movie because they didn't forward it or wait, and they thought something was up and they gave up because no one would know.
Well, exactly. But we're joined by the community, and that's wonderful. We're going to have a great time. Let's get into this film. So if everyone can press play on the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press play. And now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of this film. So David, as you were just saying, you saw this film when it was released in 1970,
1979.
So you must have seen it quite early on then.
Yeah, well, I was 10 years old. No, I was 11 years old because I was born in 68. So this movie, I remember seeing it very specifically on a rainy day. It was right around the time that Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out. So we kind of got two amazing movies in 1979 around Christmas time. And of course, this is all about Star Wars is on the brain. And now Disney is throwing in their hat in the ring, so to speak, saying we're making our Star Wars movie. There's all sorts of things to talk about in terms of how they tried to distance themselves from Disney about this with their rating, making it a PG rating, taking the Walt Disney logo off at the beginning, which was very purposeful. Gary Nelson, the director, did not want to be associated with Disney, even though this was a Disney film. And he wanted a teen audience and an older audience to not think this was kiddie fodder. So, and ironically, I'll throw in that Star Trek: The Motion Picture, rated G.
Which also was one of the last movies that came out at a similar time that, as James Helliot on YouTube has mentioned, it also had an overture with it as well. But I can't remember if it was an overture with a black screen. I don't believe it was.
I think it had stars. I think it had a star flow. It's been a while. You could see it over my shoulder there.
Yeah.
I've seen it many times since, but that's one little detail that I always kind of forget.
Yep, exactly. So going back to, I mean, let's get this out of the way while we're getting into the movie. Let's compare this to Star Wars. Something we were discussing earlier is this is the anti-Star Wars. This is why, this is everything that Star Wars did that was an opposite thing. You can tell this will have been a union production that Star Wars wasn't at the time. Star Wars starts off without the overture. It has the very bombastic boom, and we're into the story. No long opening credits sequence, which was, because I mean that was one of the controversies about Star Wars when it came out, wasn't it? That it was a union requirement that people had to be credited before the movie started.
Mm-hmm.
But equally, the effects on this, the effects are wonderful, are absolutely wonderful in this film, but they are very old school effects. I think the best way I would describe this is it's a late 60s, early 70s sci-fi movie released nearly 10 years too late.
I'm very much in agreement there. If you look at even some of the production design, and we'll get to the Cygnus when we literally get to the Cygnus, but you look at the Palomino and it looks like an old rocket ship.
Yeah.
It is old school filmmaking and old school filmmaking thought process. And so, you look at sort of the studios having the in-house production, doing the special effects, kind of like Logan's Run and things like that. These last big budget epics were all done in-house. They chose very specifically not to go to ILM because back in the day, they're really, even though there was an ILM, they weren't, doing other people's big productions. So they did it all with matte paintings and models the Disney way. And it really has that look and feel. And I think that's one of those things about this film that is ultimately the charm. Whether it's the design of the robots, which will feel a little more kiddie-like, at least when you have, you look at Vincent and his eyes look like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, they do. It's even the casting choices. These were, again, comparing it to Star Wars. Star Wars had a couple of sort of A-list or high-level actors, being Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing, sort of as the anchors for that movie. But at the time, these were quite a few significant. Ernest Borgnine, big actor.
Yeah, Tony Perkins, Ernest Borgnine, Yvette Mimieux, who also has some. She was in The Time Machine, but it's kind of like an Irwin Allen disaster movie cast.
Yes.
And it all kind of has the roots in what this film originally was when it was in development. It was called Space Station 1 and then Space Probe 1, sitting and bouncing around in development until Star Wars came and everyone said, what scripts do we have that are kind of like this? But that was like a disaster movie at the edge of a black hole. And it had to be retooled. But the casting of this really kind of still has its one foot very firmly entrenched in disaster movie territory, especially with Ernest Borgnine.
Definitely. And I think as well, it's the performances in this film. They're fine performances, but everyone is acting too hard in some ways. That's the way I feel like. Like they're really trying to deliver these lines so seriously that some of it almost comes across as ironic.
I think it's a testament in a good way. And not having been there myself, but having spoken to Gary Nelson, the director, I've spoken to Joseph Bottoms, and I've spoken to Robert. Robert Robert Forster. Sorry, I had a moment distracting watching and thinking at the same time. But yeah, I spoke with Robert Forster as well right before he passed, and I wrote a 40th anniversary piece for the Hollywood Reporter on this, which was a real special privilege for me. They all took this seriously because Star Wars was such a blockbuster and part of the zeitgeist and such a phenomenon. Everyone knew what was at stake here. This was the biggest budget movie that Disney was doing at the time. And they wanted to be serious about this. And so they were ready and willing and able to do anything that was required of them to vault them into the stratosphere of the box office.
But here we are. We're seeing even the spaceship effects. This is maybe nearly 3 years after Star Wars was released, and they look they look fine.
Like they were 13 years before, right?
Yeah, they couldn't match. And again, this is testament to Star Wars. as to where they, as to how they moved things on so much.
It's, if you look at them and the way they're floating around in there, or trying to make it look like they're floating around, they're of course balancing on cables. There was a lot of wire work that was going on to make them look weightless, and they would often, in order to hide the cables, they would paint them to match the background best they could. But what's interesting is, you look at Yvette Mimieux, she was not the first cast. It was her character was Jennifer O'Neill of Summer of '42, who was originally the first actor cast. But Jennifer O'Neill had this really long hair. And so Gary Nelson said, when he was watching tests of them doing their weightlessness, her hair would flop all over the place and it was giving away the illusion. So guess what? You got to cut your hair. And her hairstylist, Vidal Sassoon, cut her hair, and she had a little bit too much to drink because she was pretty depressed watching her hair get shorter and shorter and shorter. And unfortunately, she got in a car after that and got into an accident. She was ultimately okay, but she could not do the film. And the next day, there's Yvette Mimieux. She's cast at the last minute, and they asked her to cut her hair, and she did it. And now that's what we have as our memory.
Yeah. I mean, I know we appear to be maybe being a little hard on this film. I don't think we are. I think obviously you're going to have to make references to Star Wars because that's where this movie came from. As you know, it was from the I want one of those that all the studios did after Star Wars came out.
Indeed.
They wanted a massive blockbuster. I mean, we had Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Everything was. You can tell. I mean, if these movies came out in 1979 with the amount of pre-production, scripting, preparation, everything, this will have been basically green-lit as soon as Star Wars first weekend probably hit. They went, right, it's rewriting box office. We've got to have one of them.
This moment right here that we're getting to is the moment that really first sold it to me as an exciting movie. I love that blue star field. That's clearly, it's just a painting, but it adds color to the darkness of space. I've always found the Cygnus to be one of the greatest designs of a spaceship / character in sci-fi. I still, to this day, think it's amazing. It's got this sort of gothic haunted house feel and vibe. And some people have said embrace this concept, and some people have said, "Oh no, it was never supposed to be like this." But this is clearly 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
I was about to say that as a kid when I watched this. We had quite a lot of older Disney movies played in the UK, and I watched the Disney 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Captain Nemo, and I've got a very much a Nautilus, Captain Nemo in space feeling about elements of this.
You got steampunk in underwater, and you've got sort of gothic punk in outer space.
Yeah.
And let's take a moment to talk about the John Barry score.
Yes.
This theme is so amazing to me. I have the soundtrack, and I've played this over and over. And for me personally, the sort of heroic theme, da 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 da, I've never really liked, because I always felt like that was sort of throwback 50s, Captain Video style heroic music. But
the main score,
the other theme though, is haunting and memorable.
It is, because I was discussing this with our amazing community on Discord earlier, where I said it feels perfect for a black hole for you because it feels cyclical. Because it kind of loops on itself. It reminds you of the sort of the spinning and the drawing in of the black hole.
I think that's a great point. It's this sort of mesmerizing score that does feel like your sort of your orientation is a little thrown.
Yeah.
I want to point out that in this scene of Jeopardy, which I think is kind of interesting, you think you're about to get to the Cygnus, and then all of a sudden they're being pulled into the black hole. This is the first moment where something that's arguably a what WTF moment for some people is when Kate McRae, Yvette Mimieux, starts using her psychic link with Vincent.
Yes.
Which is established here and then essentially forgotten for much of the movie.
It is, but I think there's some great stuff we're seeing with Vincent here, and this also makes me wonder if this is something. I doubt it was borrowed, but in the Star Wars prequels, we because Vincent is R2D2 effectively with a huge. He's
Yes.
R2D2 and C3PO
Yeah, he's a
rolled
hybrid. Exactly.
rolled into one. But we do see in the Star Wars, in the Phantom Menace, we see R2 units performing a very similar function, repairing the ship and going out magnetically on the outside in space to repair the ships in flight, crawling around on the surface, which we're seeing Vincent doing here. So I do wonder if there's a little bit of back and forth. But then again, you've got to wonder, does it really matter now? Because Disney own this and they own Star Wars now, so they can't really steal from themselves anymore. It's
And
all...
it's the reason, most likely, that there was not a Black Hole remake or reboot, because Disney was planning to go do it. And once they acquired Star Wars, that's why the third Tron kind of stalled, and the new Black Hole reboot kind of stalled.
I personally wouldn't want a Black Hole reboot. And as there's another elephant in the room with this film that a lot of our community, James on YouTube and some of our Discord members have been mentioning as well, that effectively Event Horizon is an X-rated or an R-rated version of the Black Hole for the most part.
Right, exactly. The director of Oblivion and Tron Legacy, he just did Top Gun 2. It's Joseph. It'll come to me. But if you look at the opening scene of Tron Legacy, in the kids' room, there's a quick shot of Black Hole toys as well as Tron toys. And that's kind of the nod to the attempt to remake the Black Hole in the future that got sidelined.
Yeah. It's a shame, but I think this movie couldn't easily be remade as the movie it is. The sensibilities and the way the movies are shot, it just wouldn't feel like the same movie at all.
Joseph Kosinski, that's the last name I was looking for.
Here we go. We're seeing Vincent definitely is an R2D2 homage, or in some way with his gadgets that just happen to appear as his Deus Ex Machina gadget supplies Swiss Army knife internally.
Yeah. Then that moment also where he's about to be sucked into the black hole, it's the briefest of brief moments. But as a kid, you're like, oh, wait, I was just getting to like him. Yeah. And of course, I don't know if we've mentioned Roddy McDowall is, of course, providing the voice. And we all know Roddy McDowall from many, many, many sci-fi and other, from Planet of the Apes series and so many other films.
Well, of course, there's a connection because this will be the first time of 3 times he played a character named Vincent.
Interesting. Now, here's a moment that is also extremely memorable because everything's dark. You think it's an abandoned ship, and then all of a sudden, the lights go on. They haven't yet, have they, for everybody?
It is very, like you say, it is a very sort of steampunky Victorian era. It reminds me of the Victorian crystal palaces that they used to build. The look of the ship, these great glass and metal structures.
It's such a complicated design that it was not especially toyetic. They have made models of it, but it's very hard to, make this. I guess you could do it and just, it's just so intricately detailed. So when, of course, Disney went to town marketing and merchandising the black hole with action figures and so on and so forth, they even we're going to make a Palomino. I think there's a prototype or maybe a couple, but it wasn't widely distributed. But they never made a Cygnus, and I would have so bought a Cygnus, die-cast toy if they had made it.
You might have done, but when you were 10, you'd be more likely to be flying your X-Wing fighter with the fact you pushed the droid's head down and the wings opened up.
And that's the thing, is I look back and I have no black hole toys from when I was a kid. And I remember they were everywhere and I never wanted to buy them. The only one I wanted to buy was either Maximilian or Vincent, and they seemed to be the only ones that would fly off the shelf. And I never got them.
Here's a great question, from Eric in our Discord community, which is, do we know if the model survived and is displayed anywhere?
That's a good question that I do not have an answer.
I don't know myself either. But if it survives anywhere, it's possibly in one of the Disney archives. There's a wonderful... there's a wonderful show on Disney Plus. I forget the name of it. I think you've seen it, David, haven't you? About the archives, and there's a Tron episode and a few others when they bring the
Yep,
archives
yep.
out and they restore them. Trying to remember.
We should lobby for a black hole episode because
Yeah.
Disney does keep everything. They have pretty massive archives, and they break a lot of this stuff out. And I've been fortunate to be on the Disney lot many times, and I do remember one time just seeing Voyage to the Top of the World. Is that it? Was that what it was called? But some of the stuff just sitting in behind glass when I was going to a screening, and I was just like, this is gold to me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's plenty of black hole stuff out there.
One of my favourite things they do in the Disney parks is, I'm a big fan of them. They often put movie props and things just hidden in the background, like spare props from filming. There's a wonderful one in Hollywood Studios I found in Orlando. Behind there's see if anyone can guess what's there. There's a frozen drink stand called Peavy's Frozen Concoctions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's named for Peavy from The Rocketeer. And if you look on a shelf just behind, you can see one of the Rocketeer replica Rocketeer jetpack and helmet just sat on a shelf, which is it's wonderful to see these props just dotted all over.
Sometimes it's hard to believe that what you hold so dear is just sitting right in front of you, and you're like, it can't be the original. It's got to be a copy of.
Yeah.
I felt that way when I saw the Enterprise at the Smithsonian when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It was just hanging on the wall, and I'm like, that must be an Enterprise model, but it was the Enterprise model.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time reconciling that that's the real thing.
Exactly. This is really great, but it's hard to know if this inspired other films or if this took from other films or other films were inspired by this, because it's this whole kind of abandoned space station type scenario we've seen in a lot of sci-fi through the years.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about a literal borrow or steal, if you look at the guns, the blasters that are used by the sentries in this, and we'll see that soon enough. It's sort of this double-barreled thing that you hold in the middle. And if you look at Star-Lord's weapon in Guardians of the Galaxy, it's a direct homage, if not steal, if not coincidence.
Yeah. But then that could be a thing as well. That could be some really cool stuff from James Gunn in the movie, because Star-Lord, as we know, is a pop culture freak.
Right.
This would have been a movie he may have seen as a child on Earth, because he was supposed to have left in the 80s.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it could be he fashioned his weapons after the guns.
That's a way of rationalizing it. You're good at that. That's good. Yeah. That's good. I'm not implying it was stolen. I'm sure
yeah.
Every movie that is made, this one, Star Wars, everything stands on the shoulders of everything that came before it. And,
definitely.
It's the sincerest form of flattery if it ends up in some way, shape, or form legitimate or similar in your film.
Oh, James, that's exactly. So James on our YouTube chat is saying exactly what I thought. It's very similar to the opening of the god-awful Lost in Space film from 1998, where there's the kind of the abandoned kind of greenhouse in space on the ship that they find.
Now we can see the weapons I'm talking about from the century.
Yes.
So here's where the production design of the black hole still resonates to this day for me. I thought these sentries looked really cool. I was happy to have them as sort of stormtrooper stand-ins. I thought Maximilian was super cool. I still, to this day, think he's the best. And the signals and just the colorful elements of this. These are all elements to me to this day that I still think about when I think about what this was and what it also could have been. And that I had to wait a very long time for them to make like the real deal. So there you go. There's my toys.
That's very cool.
Also, since we're sort of holding up some merchandise, it's also important to know that the novelization, Alan Dean Foster wrote the novelization, which is mostly close to it, and it has we'll get to it later, but he does have his own version of the ending compared to what the movie was. Yeah. And we'll get to that whole ending conversation when we get towards the ending, but I'll just say this about the ending. There was no ending even as they were filming this. The script ended saying, and they go into the black hole, dot, dot, dot. But there was no what happens once they're in. And they spent the entire production, 26 weeks of this, trying to figure out what it was going to be, saying, well, we'll get to it, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. We got to do something interesting.
Exactly. It's a very interesting film. It is a bit sort of Captain Nemo, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's a bit. It is, as you say, it's steampunk. It's almost Victorian in this. This could be a sailing ship, a giant sailing ship they found on the sea. It just happens to be in space.
In 20,000 Leagues, in the Disney 20,000 Leagues, also they go when they first go into the Nautilus. There's no one around.
Yeah.
So it's very, very similar. It's almost beat by beat. By there's 20,000 Leagues was such a hit. They said it's really got to be similar to this.
And again, though, David, something you brought up is this wonderful, striking blue star field that this movie has. It's kind of, it's not common in many movies. They tend to always use a black star field for the most part.
I'd like to interrupt real quick, just because we're at the scene where they walk onto the bridge. That is the ultimate matte painting. It's not a full-size bridge. And Peter Ellenshaw and his son, Harrison Ellenshaw, spearheaded over 150 mats to make this look as big as it was, including the Starfleet maps.
It looks incredible. And this is the matte paintings. What a shame that they aren't as prevalent anymore. Everything can just be done in the computer, and it's a shame because it's such a skill. The guys who did matte painting work in the 70s and 80s, well, before then, but in so many movies where you can't even tell it's a matte painting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just incredible.
Here's the introduction of Maximilian coming out of the shadows, but you see that red light. I was also into Cylons at the time, and maybe that's why I connected with Maximilian, because even though he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
He says that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I tell you what he also reminds me of in this, and I don't know if this was lifted because Tron came afterwards. He reminds me a bit of the ship from Tron. His face. What are they called in Tron?
The MCP.
No. The like the no, not so. God, I forgot what they're called.
Oh, like the recognizer. The recognizer.
Yes.
You're right. Yeah, the sort of arched, arch framed recognizer. Yeah, it's there.
Oh, Sark's cruiser. They're all saying Maximilian Schnell. He could be a James Bond. Did Maximilian Schnell actually ever pay?
No, but this is a point that I wanted to make. This whole set and his reveal and his scene rechewing and mysterious elements about him, this could be a James Bond movie. He's like a James Bond villain, and this was like very much a Ken Adams set in a James Bond film in terms of the production design.
Yeah, I mean, these could be deleted scenes from Moonraker or similar.
Exactly. Wait, I thought that was today's movie, Moonraker? I'm confused. That's what I'm watching. Now, there's this whole connection here. I think there's only so many dimensions to this character, but it's great because he really plays it as both helpful and mysterious at the same time. You quickly realize there's something sketchy about him.
Yeah, but the light, sorry, just to interrupt for a second, the lighting on him is wonderful. Her face is fully lit, but on that shot there, only the piercing eyes are lit. It's wonderful.
Classic movie storytelling there. Now, of course, this is Gary Nelson, if we haven't mentioned it already. Gary Nelson, previously to this for Disney, he did Freaky Friday. Jodie Foster. And prior to this, he was essentially a journeyman filmmaker who'd done mostly television, Gilligan's Island and F's Troop and TV movies and so on and so forth. And he really wanted Maximilian Schell. Maximilian Schell was playing hard to get and was notoriously a difficult actor to work with. And he'd fly all the way to Europe to basically lobby Maximilian Schell. And he met Maximilian Schell on the set of one of his films. Maximilian Schell had said, yeah, you should probably cast Jason Robards in this role. I think he'd be great. I just saw him in this TV movie about politics in Washington. And Gary Nelson said, "Are you jerking my chain? I directed that film." And as soon as Maximilian Schell realized that he was the director of the film, he was trying to sort of dodge and point him in that direction, then he immediately agreed to do this. But his caveat was that since he was finishing his film, while he had downtime, he would have nearby editing bays, so he could go next door and continue to edit his film with his editor while he was waiting for the next shot to be set up.
It's a wonderful role. He's kind of a combination of mad scientist. Again, another sci-fi movie that came out very close to this that I would really see inspiration of, and particularly in his introduction, would be Hans Zarkov in Flash Gordon.
Oh yeah,
the top
who
hole
also was a
kind
little
of,
nutty in a good way.
Well, at the beginning of Flash Gordon, you don't know if he's planning to kill them all or not because he's absolutely insane.
He basically hijacks them to another planet. That's not cool.
There you go. Lizard Man in the Discord is saying, do the Sentinels remind anyone of Ming's Guards a bit? It's all very similar, the sci-fi of the era. You can see so many little bits, homages and borrowed and whatever.
It's great because I think that's the appeal. I mean, if you look at like those control panels, they're so colorful, yet they're unique in their own way. You know, as much as Disney sort of tries to non-Disneyfy themselves with this film, there is lots of color, and I feel like this is a Technicolor film versus focusing on just a brand new adventure in sci-fi. And these all are kind of conflated in our memories if you're not revisiting them over and over. It's easy to confuse some of the production design of Flash Gordon and Black Hole now that you think of it, given the colorful palette. And I also love how, Anthony Perkins for me was not, at that stage in my life, I only knew him as, isn't that the guy from Psycho?
That's what I was going to say. I was about to bring that up. Anthony Perkins, what a strange choice as sort of your leading man for a hero type role.
He had worked in a Western with Gary Nelson, and also Perkins would do anything he could to get out of the shadow of Norman Bates. And so while I think the audience it's not telegraphing it, but the audience is thinking, is there some shady element to his character? He relished having an opportunity to just be a completely different type of personality.
Well, speaking of Anthony Perkins, one of my all-time favourite Anthony Perkins films was made about a year later by him. And it is a wonderful film. I don't know if you've seen it, David. Have you ever seen it? It goes by a few titles. It's called Assault Force, North Sea Hijack, or Folks. And it stars Folks. You know, it's Folks. It was released in a few names around the world. Roger Moore. What a wonderful film. If anyone's got some downtime over Christmas,
2 F's, F-F-O-L-K-E-S.
If you can find a copy of the movie, watch it. It is a joy because you've got Anthony Perkins chewing the scenery. It's Die Hard on a boat, and Roger Moore is...
And his cat.
And his knitting, and both his parents died in childbirth, which I don't quite know how it happened in that film, but it is a wonderful film. It's Roger Moore basically playing the anti-Bond with Anthony Perkins. It's a wonderful film.
There's a moment that when they're in the elevator here where it's the beginning of actually kind of a well-written repartee back and forth rivalry that Vincent is not one to stand down. Vincent has a very strong personality, and he is not going to be intimidated or shown up by any of the other robots on this ship. And it starts with Maximilian, and it goes to the sentries and the shootout later, and then even at the tail end where there's a confrontation. Vincent really just never backs down, and is never short of a quip. In sort of a James Bondian way.
It's quite interesting though, because as we see the robots in the film.
Yeah, because they are robots.
Literally. They are robots.
That's what they're called.
Yeah, the robots in the film appear to be almost alive because they obviously have some kind of emotional status to them. When we see in a minute that they have a competitive side to them. where they take part in competitions. So they're a little more fleshed out, these robots, than in many films. And you can just see that Maximum's basically a jerk there. He's just bully. He's a bully.
Yeah, he is very much a bully. By the way, when they were traveling to see the other robots, and now they're picking on old Bob, just the way they even travel along this ship is very James Bondian. It's very,
It is.
I feel like they said, wait, I really like the "You Only Live Twice" volcano set. Why don't we bring some of that to the Cygnus in terms of at least how they get around?
Could also be lifted from something like the British shows like Thunderbirds
Right?
or Thunderbirds
Space
Fireball XL.
1999.
Yeah, Fireball XL5. Any of those sort of the Jerry Anderson type shows where they used, especially the puppets, they'd use similar travelling vehicles because it made it easier for filming
I could
purposes.
easily see this as a Jerry Anderson style puppet adventure,
Yeah.
and I would have bought it, and it would have felt the same in the end.
It
With
almost
old
feels.
Bob,
I'm going to put my hand up and
Go
say
ahead,
this feels
go ahead.
British. This film, in a way, because it's got that dark, gritty side to it that a lot of the British films had. British sci-fi of this era quite often was a bit depressing, a bit dirty.
Absolutely. There's always like a twist around the corner, always sort of I think they're drafting off of a sort of Twilight Zone element of the writing or Outer Limits where, it can't be face value. There has to be an underlying sort of either sinister or caveat that they ultimately discover. And that's kind of the big mystery on this ship is where's the crew? And he says the crew's gone, but they're not. They're still there, but of course, we all know what's going on, but we'll wait for the reveal, I suppose. So whenever they would be walking around and the robots would be following along with them, it looks like they're floating. And of course, we know they're not floating, but they're actually not being held by wires. They're on these little gimbals and dollies that they could just sort of push up and down to make it look like they're floating up and down as they're walking.
That's quite interesting because that way of puppetry is used in again, with if we go back to sort of the Jerry Anderson his technique was called Super Mario Nation, where his puppets were suspended from above, and they do this kind of bouncy walk. Where there was a show from Japan in the 80s that a lot of people thought was a Jerry Anderson show called Starfleet X Bomber or X Bomber. And it had very famous had a robot called Die-X, where 3 command. But they were different puppets in the way, and they were very similar. That they were controlled by a rod from underneath.
Aha!
So very similar method to the kind of puppetry that would have used for Vincent here.
And you're going on based on presupposition of how things work, and you expect that it's a marionette, and then you're like there are no wires, and immediately. That's part of the magic of all this stuff is like, even though it's not real, they're creating an illusion for suspension of disbelief, but you really sort of zero in on how did they do it. I've always marveled about the how and the why.
Exactly. I mean, one of the problems with using puppetry where, again, going back to this movie, one of the problems they would have would be if they were using puppets for Vincent or Bob that were suspended by wires from above, you would have a problem in creating sets that felt more claustrophobic where you could see the ceiling, because of course you'd struggle or have to do a lot of post-production work somehow to get the ceiling back in there because the wires, of course, because of practical things. So it's really interesting how all these things were done. Now this seems more like a religious cult elements of this to me.
Yeah, there's something not quite right going on here, and for an empty ship, it's not empty. He's realizing what's going on, and he thinks they're supposed to be robots. It's kind of another one of those sort of unanswered questions, which I think is fine with the black hole. There's some mystery here. They're supposed to be robots, yet they're doing something that is extremely human. And even in the logic of the film itself, it doesn't make full sense because they're supposed to be automatons that follow Maximilian Schell's every order. Yet they're holding funerals for their dead friends. So it doesn't make complete sense, but it does make you wonder and scratch your head, and it makes things much more interesting in this mystery.
Exactly. Just got Sparky John saying, "Very strange, a robot funeral. Something's going on here." So it's
Well, it's the sense memory. Maybe they don't know what they're doing, but they know that they've got to do that. So they happen to fashion a coffin or find one
yeah,
and use it.
or a torpedo tube maybe.
Uh-huh.
Now I
So
love
Harry Booth,
Ernest.
everyone had a Harry Booth action figure, right? Just checking. Harry Booth here is about to find out the truth
He
behind these
is.
robots.
Now I love Ernest Borgnine. He's always been a real favourite of mine. But was he cast in this movie as a big name? Because he was.
I think because he did so many of these Irwin Allen style disaster movies. By that point, that's how we know him. You
Mm,
know, there's a whole interesting way of looking at actors in the beginning, the middle, and the end of their career, or towards the end, and the types of roles that they took. And at the time in the 70s, while his career might have been sort of an Irwin Allen sort of, heading down territory, Poseidon Adventure, that kind of stuff like that. He's still considered a big name. You know, he's an Oscar
yeah.
winner. And so that's what the studios think. They're like, we need some Oscar winners to draw in the crowd that aren't just the kiddie crowd, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, he's quite Ernest Borgnine. I had a lot of respect for the guy. He was a great actor, but also he didn't seem as precious as certain actors of the era that he was. Because what people need to remember is back then, you'd have an actor. I'm a movie actor. I'm a TV actor, and never the
Mm-hmm.
twain shall meet quite a lot. And there was a bit of a thing about Ernest Borgnine. Quite happily seemed to hop between movies and TV. He didn't have a problem. He did, famously Muck Hale's Navy. He, From Here to Eternity as a proper theatrical actor. He did these movies, but then a couple of years later, he was co-starring the lead in Airwolf.
You take what you can get at that age, and I don't say that lightly. No one remains on top for a certain amount of time. And I think some people sometimes need a reminder that there's a very, very thick line between movies and TV in terms of actors. You were either a movie actor or you were a TV actor. And
Yeah,
like you said, never the twain shall meet. It was very rare to have crossover. It's funny, even, people like to talk about Die Hard as the ultimate Christmas movie. When Die Hard came out, it was like, really, the guy from Moonlighting is now going to be an action hero? I'm not buying it.
yeah,
It was a rare choice to have him do that, but of course he's cheaper because he's doing TV and so on and so forth. There's always sorts of interesting choices, and a lot of times it comes down to budget and box office draw with a lot of these choices. But you see other films that sort of cross this Rubicon of, you can't do this, and they do it and they're successful, and then next thing you know, everyone wants to do it, which would explain why Tom Selleck was all of a sudden okay to do Indiana Jones.
yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, now that fortunately that stigma seems to have disappeared because the quality of television is so good now that actors do quite happily hop between the two, and they seem to have no qualms about it. And it's certainly
And
made
most
television
actors
stronger.
these days want a series on, HBO or Netflix or something like that, where they could do anything they want because it's more than just 2 hours. It isn't live or die at the box office, and there seems to be some more longevity and meatier roles to dive into, to take the time to sort of explore a character rather than in and out in 2 hours.
I see him walking down the endless corridors. It almost reminds me of it is great, but and it wouldn't have been done that way. It almost reminds me of the clip in The Simpsons where they're describing how they save money in animation, where they repeat the backgrounds and they keep walking past the same
Right,
cleaner
right, right.
every so often. It's that kind of
I've always thought it's kind of interesting because clearly they've got their uniforms that are, spacesuit, jumpsuit / military rankings and so on and so forth. Yet the Palomino looks like a tin can salvage one spaceship.
yeah.
So it sort of doesn't gel, that, especially when you're coming to this and Star Trek is playing in the other theater, and you're thinking, well, what is this sort of organization that they're coming from, even though it's a sort of space explorers. There's just a taste of it there, but it's not enough world building before you jump onto the Cygnus. I was going to say with Bob, I never, I appreciate Bob now, but at the time when I watched this, the Slim Pickens voice was a little weird and precious to me, and
Yeah.
I did not understand how he was just this still functioning mashed robot that wasn't put in a junk heap. I just didn't understand the necessity of his role. Sorry,
Now
Bob
this,
fans. I'm not
now
saying
this
I don't like him now.
this scene is pure Captain Nemo to me. The grand kind of dining room, formal wear, everyone drinking, eating the finest.
Right, right. You know, he's going to go play the organ before they sit down while the the octopus is served to them.
Yeah.
If you look in the background, you've got that giant painting. That's one of the matte paintings in the production design that they said, well, let's just put that in a painting, you know, to add to the ambience. But Gary Nelson, who originally said, no, I don't want to do this. This isn't my cup of tea. Ron Miller, who ran Disney, the son-in-law of Walt Disney, he said, please come and look at Peter Ellenshaw's production artwork and production designs and see what you think before you say no. And he was sold very much so by all the design. Robert McCall, I also want to say a great noted futurist concept designer and artist, did a lot of the designs here as well, especially for the robots, but the robots were all thrown out because they just weren't what Gary Nelson's vision was. And Gary Nelson had a very specific hand in designing, so he stands by that. He's like, if you like them, great. If you don't like them, it's all on me. I want to know who that like old president painting is behind Robert Forster. Maybe that's, you know, Robert Cygnus, who you know,
Yeah.
it's named after. Of course, Cygnus, of course, is that where the first black hole, the Cygnus galaxy? And I'm totally throwing it out there. There's this connection between Cygnus and black holes.
Well,
Down
this is
to
the
the point
beautiful
where
thing,
there's
David.
a
We
Cygnus
have.
X1 Rush song all about a black hole.
Don't worry, David. This is the wonderful thing about these watch parties. We have our amazing community who will come back with the answer for all these questions we fire at them. Cygnus X1 X-ray source 1. So, Dr. Reinhardt's ship was originally named the Centaurus. It was renamed Cygnus after the constellation where the first known black hole was discovered in 1964.
Black hole. Okay. I'm going to pat myself on the back, ladies and gentlemen. That's from the cobwebs of my memory of association. So, of course, they're working against a blue screen there.
Yes.
There's blue screens, and then there's green screens, and then there's what works against the background in terms of what people are wearing. And that's the only difference about why they use it. You can't have a complement, a similar color, otherwise it disappears against the blue screen or the green screen. So I'll throw other sort of randomness out here. Also, this is the Star Sentry, right? The head sentry, who's a little different, and there's a little bit of a Western shoot 'em up showdown going on here, which goes very much to what Gary Nelson loved, you know, very much so, which is he really. If you talk to any of these directors who are taking on these kiddie sci-fi films, they're like, well, I can connect with it because it's like a Western in space. They saw Star Wars as a Western in space because this is what they grew up with. Westerns were the big thing until Sputnik told everyone it was all, you know, outer space adventures other than Flash Gordon. So a lot of these old school directors, that's how they best connected with the material.
It's a question because you're actually seeing the robot there laughing at them. He's mocking him effectively, pretending to. He's kind of like that, laughing at Bob's performance.
Yeah, yeah. Here's our moment.
Yeah.
Do we remember what Vincent stands for?
I'm sure the community will let me know in just a moment.
Right, and old Bob, that's the current trivia question. If you guys haven't put that up there already, I'm not following the feed. I do think it's interesting to mention that Ron Miller, who was running the studio at the time, he's a name that you don't really see that much. And then when he left and, you know, Eisner took over the studio subsequently a little down the road after leaving Paramount, and running a bunch of the Star Trek films there. Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg took over Disney, and this was a time right now where Disney really was, they weren't, their live action department was not, it was fledgling. They were just doing a bunch of kiddie films and young, Kurt
Well, I'd
Russell
say
films.
almost after this, they only did a couple more years before they really contracted in their proper film movie division of Walt Disney Pictures, Buena Vista Pictures. It was only probably another best part of 10 years before they started to put some budget back into the movies again. There was,
up till now, it was, animation was faltering. They were trying to figure out what to do next. It was a bunch of, Herbie and Apple Dumpling Gang, and Escape from Witch Mountain and, that kind of stuff. So Ron Miller was realizing that they needed to compete with the Joneses, especially with Star Wars.
Yeah.
And between this and Tron, he deserves a lot of credit for giving the filmmakers, once they decided to do this, as much leeway as possible to do what they wanted. Because they really wanted to make a name for themselves with more competitive family entertainment that wasn't just for kids.
Exactly. It's strange to think that, I mean, now Disney are, I think, probably one of the biggest film studios, if not in the world, with their content output of the amount of box office they take through grounded in the MCU, but they've got so many other irons in the fire that they were not a particularly notable movie company for a long time.
What's interesting here is this was approximately $20 million budget at the time to make this film. And when it came out, it did well at the box office. It made about $35 million at the box office, which seems like peanuts now, but given its budget, it almost recouped its budget. And so, that's why there were no subsequent Black Hole films. But compared to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, that made a much more amount of money, but also its production cost was much higher. And so if you connect the two, this actually recouped more of its investment than Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yeah. Because
Gary Nelson's very proud of that.
Well, the thing to remember is, talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, for our Star Trek: The Motion Picture, we've spoken about this privately. I like the film, but I have my problems with it. People need to remember that it nearly killed the franchise again.
Mm-hmm.
It very nearly killed what they were seeking as the rebirth, which is why we got the wonderful Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which of course we watched a while ago, because they ended up saying, right, you can't have all the toys, all the money. Now make a Star Trek movie.
Right. Now you're talking about in terms of Wrath of Khan, correct?
Mm.
Yeah.
Because
I think
they'd thrown the family jewels at Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and they've gone, yes, all right. It was lukewarm for a lot of people.
Very much so. It was just very disappointing, very stodgy, very slow. People, again, it all comes back to Star Wars. I mean, it's an obvious thing, but it can't be understated how huge the influence and impact of Star Wars was. And so everyone wanted a space movie, and every audience member wanted a movie like Star Wars if it wasn't Star Wars. Yet Star Trek: The Motion Picture was more 2001 meets a slow-moving episode of Star Trek than the thing that, the action adventure and the laser fights and space battles that people were hoping to see. But they rectified that very much so in part.
With Wrath of Khan. But
and I must add real quick, when you cut a budget in half or more, you have only your creativity and your bootstraps to make something good. When you have the luxury of too much money, sometimes it becomes overindulgent.
Yeah, exactly.
Robert Forster, really working man's actor as well. He was very, very, very excited to be doing this film. He was really sold with the idea of working with Borgnine and the other actors and Perkins. But to him, he was like, if the work is solid, I'll take it. And he's very professional and very workmanlike. And to him, he says, I've always been a freelancer, and this is the most steady gig I ever had working on this film. But he really enjoyed, hanging by the wires, and he even got slightly injured while making this film when debris hit his eyebrow during one of the action sequences. But for him, it's all in the day's work, and he was a real good guy.
Oh, he was. I mean, I think one of my favourite Robert Forster roles is one of his last. I think it's his last ever role, which was one of his last ever roles was in the 2020 reboot of Amazing Stories, where he played a grandpa. Some of the episodes of that show were wonderful, and he played the grandfather in an episode called Dynaman and the Vault.
Yep.
Which he was absolutely wonderful in.
I had the privilege of sitting down with him and hanging out with him for this Hollywood Reporter article just 6 weeks before he passed. And I did not even know he was sick, and he didn't say a word, and he was a joy to be with. He even invited me. He was doing a live reading for a theater group of Airplane, the movie, and he played a couple roles, including the captain over under. It was
Captain Dunn.
Dunn, yeah. There's Dunn.
I think there was First Officer over,
Dunn, under, and over.
Yeah, I think it was Captain Dunn. I think. Anyway, wonderful.
But yeah, he invited me over, and he was such a gentleman, a really nice guy, and I have to just say, just because he gifted me this letter opener, just for no good reason other than thanks for writing this cool article. And I don't know, I felt like many people said that when they were in his orbit, they felt like they were incredibly special and seen. And he had that gift of making not only wonderful roles memorable, but also of making people feel special. And I was one of those people, and I feel very, charmed that I got that opportunity.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful when you meet an acting icon like that, and he's as great as you would hope. And he was a tremendous actor, again, who flitted between movies and TV, and just so many wonderful.
Yeah, Medium Cool. If anyone's never seen Medium Cool, he plays this this photographer who captures some very interesting things sort of on the front lines of photography. It's really interesting and a great role. And he's worked with Sinatra. When he did this movie, he wasn't intimidated by all these acting legends, because one of his first films, he was working with Sinatra, and so he got over that, and everything was easy peasy for him. And he would always say, when he would see you later, when he would say, time to say goodbye, he'd say, "See you on the next bounce." I like this Hans Reinhardt. He's got his dress medal on, which is very interesting. Not sure what that's for, but it's definitely not valor, I can tell you that.
Again, what's something you said earlier, David, about this being blue screen or green screen at the time. Obviously it is, but it's also wonderful, and it shows sort of the level of the production quality, because they haven't done what even they did on Star Trek: The Next Generation for quite a while, which was just have a curtain for space with pinpricks in it and light shining through it for a star field. We can actually see it's a fully animated star field just as a background thing that's going on at the moment.
Exactly, and it's very complicated as well. These days they would project that. They would do it ahead of time, and they would project it so it feels real behind there. But that was a very, 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 very complicated animation that they had to do, and they had to figure that out early on, even though they didn't figure out the ending yet. They still, when they're filming the scene, they're like, they cut, they do another setup, and they'd say, okay, about that ending, we really got to figure that one out. And I could talk to you about what they did shoot for this ending that they ultimately didn't use, but I guess we'll hold on to that one.
I think so.
All I could say is that as they were doing this and trying to figure it out, Gary Nelson recruited Peter Ellenshaw and Harrison Ellenshaw as his sort of confidants to figure something out. And they were leaning more and more towards the religious. And it's very interesting because one of the opening sequences, one of the opening lines in the opening sequence, when they're talking about what this black hole looks like, they're talking about how it looks like the pit of hell, and that you expect to see a devil with a pitchfork there.
It really is. I mean, it's again something this movie's got, and then we see in other sci-fi movies, and you do wonder if there's some inspiration there for them, because he almost appears to be the leader of a cult. The way he dresses, he's very much like it's a religious cult. The altar is the black hole that they're worshipping. It's very much like that. And again, these are themes we've seen from, again, we saw in Event Horizon that maybe takes it to an extreme. But equally, the religious obsession with a solar or a space thing.
Right, the winter solstice, or the summer solstice.
Well, I'm going to go to Sunshine, the 2007 film.
Uh-huh.
Where Pinbacker, the character in that, quite famously becomes, and other people start to become obsessed with the spirituality of being near the sun, as if it is heaven or hell, and it's a worshipable entity, and which is very much, you can see roots of that in this.
Another film which really is all over the map, and
yes.
For me, the sum of it's not the sum of its parts, but the sum of its parts. Those parts are really wonderful.
Yes.
And I don't know, you could watch a triple feature of Sunshine, Event Horizon, and the Black Hole, and they're all kind of interchangeable in certain ways at certain points, especially, of course, Black Hole and Event Horizon.
Definitely.
I always didn't really notice it, but now that I'm really staring at it, there's lots of sweater action going on here, and Harry Booth's sweater is like a maritime casual sweater.
It's especially Ernest Borgnine. He seems to have the most comfortable looking sweater of all of them, doesn't he? Almost like almost knitted. But this is such James Bond villain. He's almost wearing the Dr. No kind of.
Right.
It's very similar. His outfit is too. It's an Indian wedding suit.
The Nehru collar.
Yeah, it's called an Indian wedding suit. And they're these kind of very sort of suits that are almost sort of very plain, no buttons, etc., like that. And the whole barking commands standing up there. It's pure James Bond villain, as you're saying that. We've got Sparky John asking David, would you be able to talk about the Black Hole pop-up book?
The Black Hole pop-up book? Well, I don't have it, but I'm going to show my book and record collection here.
Wow.
The book and record collection that they, book and record, where you put the record on and you listen to them narrate it.
Who's reading that one? Is it actually anyone from the movie, or is it just generic?
This is the original real deal.
Oh, wow.
And, not only does it have there, but it's got the Disneyland record on there. And they had a pop-up book. They had all sorts of great stuff. They really merchandised the heck out of this. They had, I can't really talk more about the pop-up book other than that it was a super cool pop-up book that I never had. I'll remind you, when this came out, I was only interested in any money that I had, any change that I could find behind the cushions of the couch would go to another Stormtrooper or another Tusken Raider or something like that. Another Jawa, because you had to build up your Star Wars army. So even if I was interested in getting, Vincent or Maximilian, they were never sitting on the peg when I would even think about it. So I was kind of like that, where, even when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, and they had 3 3/4 inch Mego figures. I'll add this unnecessary detail, is that all the Mego 3 3/4 figures, whether it was Buck Rogers, whether it was the Battlestar Galactica, whether it was the Black Hole, all the faces were good sculpts, but they had no pupils. And that was a deterrent for me, and I'm sure for many of you guys out there, maybe not. But even though I got a couple of Battlestar Galactica figures, the humans and the Buck Rogers, these guys, Black Hole, because they had no eyes, it was no big deal. There was no emotional connection. Yeah. And so it wasn't a big deal for me to get them.
There was something about the Kenner Star Wars figures that made them look better The way they were
it's this very
packaged.
simple thing, but it humanizes the relatability of these figures. Here's
Well,
the
that's
big reveal right
interesting.
here. I think what's cool about this is that Anthony Perkins is really, he really loves Reinhardt, and he's ready to jump ship and join his thing, join his cult, so to speak. But he's only now realizing that, beware, never meet your heroes, right?
Yeah. Now, this is the interesting thing, James. You're a bit wrong there, because I actually had that as a child. I just had to check if it did exist. James is saying a few years later there would have been a Viewmaster of this film. I had the Viewmaster
I have
cards
the
of this.
Viewmaster too. I have the Viewmaster. I just didn't bring it in my pile of
Yeah.
toys, but there's a Viewmaster. Yes.
We inherited it off someone. It was a gift. It was like some kid was clearing out his toys, some parent's friend, and we got their Viewmaster. And I remember I had Viewmasters, the Viewmaster cards, or whatever, for this.
Yeah, those discs were wonderful because that was, listen, when there was nothing on video, so you got away from this film. Wait, sorry, can't talk about this without.
This is, yeah,
one of the most graphic deaths in a Disney film, even more jarring than the death of Bambi's mother. Is the death here of Tony Perkins.
You can tell though the Disney censors must have been involved because there's not a drop of blood to be seen.
It doesn't matter. It's jarring and it's intense and it's shocking. And now here's the moment where if you look at what Reinhardt says afterwards, listen to what he says. Protect me from Maximilian. That's an ad-libbed line that was not in the script. And Maximilian Schell wanted to say that. And what's so great about that is now you're even more confused as to whether or not he is this crazy leader or he's a little bit psycho or being held captive by an insane
by his creation
robot. Yeah. And that to me is one of the more interesting moments. That whole sequence right there, the death of Tony Perkins and that line, make this a movie I've been thinking about for decades since. What were we talking about before Tony Perkins got?
No, I just think it's.
We're talking about Viewmasters.
We were. I just think. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
Just going to say it's quite interesting what you're saying there about that line because he's ordering Maximilian, yet Maximilian, you wonder. We'll talk about Maximilian and the relationship more towards the end of the movie because there's a lot to discuss.
Yes, there's lots of inside material to talk about.
But you were saying about Viewmasters, sorry.
Well, yeah. Going back to and I think also back to that line that you're talking about, and I'm talking about, is that it wasn't scripted, and it's a great line, and it adds some layer to this that makes it more confusing, but I think is better for the film that it is not so clear cut. I don't think it was never intended, and now it just confuses that whole relationship. But I think that's great because now you don't know what's going on, and it's never answered, and that is compelling to me. But yeah, with Viewmaster, and this is an audience that really understands this, is that you walked out of a movie, and especially after the Star Wars came, everything was merchandised heavily. Many things were merchandised heavily, maybe not like Flash Gordon, but you ran out to get an action figure, you ran out to get the Viewmaster, you ran out to get the book and record, you ran out to get the soundtrack. And this is how you relived the movie, the trading cards. This is how you relived the movie until you got to see it again. So you'd sit in your room, your den, your bedroom, your couch, and you got to play with your own imagination and relive the moments in your own imagination because you could not watch this again just easily by renting it just yet.
Yeah, a popular thing in the 80s, I don't know if you guys had them in America, was we didn't so much have trading cards as much. We had sticker albums.
Right, okay.
Which were basically trading cards, but they were stickers, and you'd get a book of the movie, and you could remove the sticker and stick it in. The idea was to populate, very much like you'd have a trading card, where you'd populate it. And they did for a lot of the movies over here, where you would, and there were just promotional stills, hundreds of promotional stills, but you'd have to try and collect all 300 of them in the packs or whatever to fill your book up.
Now, in this scene, very cool. Then the scene where Robert Forster rescues Kate McRae, again, the music that there's playing is the John Barry music, and we keep on going back to Bond. And although we haven't stated, obviously, I'll do it now. Of course, John Barry did many of the, many of the most memorable Bond. He is directly associated with James Bond soundtracks. He is the guy, and so there is no dividing them with some of these things where it feels like a James Bond movie, especially like Moonraker, because Moonraker was 1979. So clearly in his head, two things are going at the same time in terms of the incidental music.
Oh,
now he's going to throw Kate McRae, in the oven with the baked potatoes.
That is real. They have actually just stuck tinfoil on her head in that scene, haven't they? That is aluminium foil.
This is where the whole tinfoil hat concept came from, Andrew.
There we go. Mad Matt, what a great spot. He's saying that scene reminds him of the plastic surgery scene in Logan's Run.
Yes. Except this one is they're all being lobotomized. It's the same, very good call. Although we don't see Farah in this movie anywhere, which is a real disappointment.
Well, I know. Well,
but we would see her in Saturn III.
And that will be a movie we will be doing a watch party of in 2022 at some point, because that's a movie with a lot to talk about.
Yes, exactly. See, now it's becoming a Star Wars movie, which is what everyone was hoping for. Yet now you compare it to a Star Wars movie, and you're like, well, is it the same, or how different, or is it kind of trying to pretend to be like Star Wars? But all I can say is, as a kid, as an 11-year-old kid, this is what I wanted, and I wanted laser battles, and this is what you didn't get in Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
No, but especially some of this scene makes me feel. It reminds me a lot of the chasm scene in Star Wars.
Right.
The kind of surrounded on all sides, having to make a grand push to get across.
Very much so. It's fun though. I mean, this is the wish fulfillment that you're looking for. So kudos to Disney for delivering it. Whether you want to compare it directly to Star Wars or not, this is what, give the people what they want, and this is delivering, which is great. Sound effects and all, even though they're just like toppling, standing, robot figures. There's no one in there clearly.
Oh.
And not one Wilhelm scream.
No.
In fact, someone needs to be cut the scene where every time they fall, they have to add a Wilhelm scream.
Got a question from Onzi in the community for you, David. Who would you rather be alone in a room with, Maximilian or the robot from Saturn III?
Ooh, Hector, the robot from Saturn III.
Yeah.
Well, geekily responding, Hector is not an evil robot. Hector connects with who you are. And learns from your brain waves and your brain patterns and your psychology and your, delusions and so on and so forth. And so if you are a bit of a psychopath like Harvey Keitel's character, then Hector's going to be a killer. But
if I had a splinter, I'd rather have Hector around, because he's great at removing splinters, as we see in the movie.
Yeah? A splinter?
She has a splinter in her eye.
Oh, yes. If you need a yes. Yes.
You have a splinter, you want it removed, Hector's your robot.
Hector's your guy, especially if you have to do eye surgery. You could trust him to do it, even though he's untrustworthy. Even though Shell's banging his head because he's so frustrated. That's a great question. And that's the first time in my life I've ever been asked that question. Maximilian is a cooler looking robot to me, but he's clearly the more untrustworthy one, arguably, given my logic.
Again, going back to the production design of the movie, yes, it looks fantastic, but especially on the ships, it falls into the trap of there's too many buttons. It's like we've got to put something on everything.
Mm-hmm.
You see the control panels. Every control panel has 500 buttons on it for no reason.
Well, Have you ever seen the cockpit of a plane? Have you ever seen the cockpit of a lunar
Yeah,
mission? Listen, there's more buttons than they need. They just start filling
yeah,
them out at a certain point just to make it look cool.
yeah.
No, that's a good question.
It's a production design thing that was a real trend at some points in this, where they would put buttons for buttons' sake on the set.
If you look at the Palomino and you look, there's lots of TV screens too, and they also have that 3D viewer, that holographic viewer as well. And so, arguably, that's kind of a pretty forward-thinking kind of approach to, designing a ship, because they had to have all those practical screens, which is cool. And if
Yeah,
you look at the desk in Tron, where David Warner is typing on the desk and everything like that, that didn't exist, but they fabricated that, and they had to really create a whole layer underneath there to make it work. And it's all pre choreographed to make it work and look like it's a working
Now,
tool.
I think it might have even been Sparky John mentioned to me that nearly the whole movie was dubbed in ADR. Basically, nearly every line in this movie.
In the Black Hole, sounds well. And you were talking about the serious of their delivery. You
Yeah,
know, when there's also this sort of subconscious. It sounds more direct if it's not room captured versus
yeah.
ADR.
Well, again,
And you
something
know,
from something from Star Trek: The Motion Picture that William Shatner, in his Star Trek movie Memories, speaks about is, because this would have been, of course, filmed at a very similar time to the motion picture, to make the control panels and the TV screens and everything work on the sets at the time. The lighting, they didn't have LED lighting like they've got nowadays. The sets, the panels would run so hot because they had traditional household light bulbs in, they'd have fans in, and they had a lot of problem capturing dialogue on the sets of these things
because it was so loud. Yeah.
because it was so loud. So a lot would have to be put in post.
This, by the way, also in the film, in the Black Hole, is such a great moment because you have untrustworthy characters talking about
Yeah,
Maximilian and Hector. Harry Booth is completely untrustworthy and pays the price for it right here. Brutal. Now, if you look at the sequence of events right here, it's really cool because everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong. And everything's really quiet right now. And then all of a sudden you have this celestial event that's about to happen. And I've always had a hard time that it just kind of appears out of nowhere with no no announcement, not even a bit here and a bit there, like a raindrop here and a raindrop there, and then an intense shower.
yeah.
I'm a little ahead of the movie here, but that's always where my brain went. If you look at the transition and you're paying attention to it, it really is sort of, for such a major event, all of a sudden, oh, now you thought it was bad. Now we have this, hailstorm of hot hail sent by Ming the Merciless aimed at
That's
Earth.
right. Yeah, we'll link it. We'll link it to Flash Gordon. That's Ming's hot hailstorm he's sending to Earth that just happened to knock this
Exactly.
ship.
Yes. And
That's a
now, just all hell breaks loose. This is, of course, when Robert Forster gets smacked in the head at some point, or it might have been in another part.
Now, this is something that's very interesting because this, again, going back to the theme park element, this movie was considered for a ride at Disneyland.
Theme park ride. Well, look at this ride. They're going on the ride. What would be the ride right now?
Yeah, and I wonder if that's what would have eventually been the ride. It didn't get that far along. Well, it got quite a way in, but as happens, a lot of rides get half developed and then dropped. But I do wonder if that would have maybe been the scene they would have referenced.
I would have loved that. Think about the possibilities conceptually. By the way, here's a bravura shot. This is every single commercial ended with this moment here, and the previews and so on. But this is a masterpiece, given the time and given all the retro feel of everything, of pulling off this massive boulder, which of course is ahead of the boulder that happens to Indiana Jones. And Gary Nelson is pretty convinced that Steven Spielberg saw the black hole and had some ideas.
I can believe that.
And there's some logic here too. This is kind of, where's the oxygen coming from? Well, you got to have
Yeah.
botanical wing going on there.
And the
Um,
beauty of it is as well, it's quite justifiable because the what we've discovered are the lobotomized humans. They would still be producing the carbon dioxide we have to assume for breathing because they're just humans, but they have to eat. They have to obtain nutrition somehow. They expel carbon dioxide like all of us. They would be providing the nutrition for the plants, and the plants would be sustaining them.
exactly. You kind of have a silent running thing going on here, which I wouldn't be surprised that that was one of the inspirations for this sequence here. Now, of course, they spent like 2 weeks filming this, where they're all being flocked pretty much, and you've got wind machines, you've got all this fake snow and ice. Um, Now the whole crew, they have goggles for this, but the actors, they've just got to sit here and just get pelted, and they're constantly trying to wash their eyes out after shooting this stuff. And
Oh, it looks like dust being thrown around in there as well.
they went for 2 weeks before this film came out. They went to kind of a circus camp to learn how to do all the wire work, so they wouldn't be flopping around too much, and learning how to balance properly on the wires. But this is pretty exciting stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't, whatever you say about this film, you can't say that they did not put the money on screen.
No, no,
They
it
really
looks
wanted
it,
to
it looks
create.
tremendous. It maybe doesn't look Star Wars, but that's because, again, going back to Star Wars, I think people need to remember Star Wars now is such a tentpole standard. It was a renegade movie when it came out. It was an
Mhm.
indie movie, and it rewrote everything. But for what was a very mainstream traditional movie of the era, this looks fantastic.
Bob's freezing. And also, to their credit, once they decided that, how do we disable the Cygnus? Next thing you know, this sequence goes on for a real long time, and
Yeah.
best laid plans is all I could say. Time to go into the black hole. We've been waiting for this moment. A little bit of a Frankensteinian sort of power core there. Warning. Same font as the
Yes.
as the opening, which is either consistent or they decided to borrow it, which is pretty
Well,
cool.
it's quite nice though. We saw what looked like a flat panel modern TV just falling down, which is kind of cool for the.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think at this point it's time to abandon ship. What do you think? Oh,
I
pegged in
would
the
say
back of the
so.
head. And it's interesting. This story continues in a comic series. It's a four issue comic book series, that didn't go any farther, which would have been cool to see, because I would have gone for
I think for a
all the
lot of
series
people,
and the
as we're
comic.
getting into this now, the ending of the movie is open to a lot of interpretation here, and it shares the ending of this in big elements. This are very similar to another '80s movie that came out. I think about would it be well, an '80s movie came out '87. I think it was. It would have been Millennium.
Yep.
Very similar kind of ambiguous ending.
Yeah, interesting that you tie those two together. I never would put those two together, really. Um, but sure. I don't know. I just think it's in a viewership storytelling. Oh, killed by the flat screen. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, especially if you live in an earthquake area, do not get a large flat screen, because
Yeah,
that's what
don't
will
buy a
happen.
plasma TV, buy LCD.
Yeah. But from a storytelling point of view, there's something very rewarding in seeing the villain get their comeuppance by their own plans, essentially.
Yeah.
So they have a grandmaster plan that they think will evolve the world and the universe and or themselves, and next thing you know, everything falls apart. And just when you thought they were going to get away with it. Now this feels very, all of a sudden everything gets very red. Think about it. Going
Yeah.
into the black hole itself, all of a sudden they've now clearly decided that hell is the way to go for this ending, and
Yeah.
everything has turned red. And it's almost, it's not subtle. It's clearly everything's changed. But if you're following the storyline and just the logic of things, it's sort of arbitrary that everything is red all of a sudden in the black hole. But it works for where the story is ultimately going.
Here we go. I remember as a kid seeing some of these scenes, and this is what upset me because, of course, I really liked Vincent.
Yeah. There's no way that the little guy, the bigger they are, the harder they fall is Vincent's credo. But
Yeah.
didn't think he was going to make it out of this. But
Yeah.
look at this. He basically disables Maximilian's. He makes him impotent. He loses his key weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. Again, another prolonged fight. And a lot of these things, if you think about it, I think this is where the money really goes. A lot of films, if they were going to try and do this, I think it would be short and sweet because they just wouldn't have the budget to have an extended, battle. So, couple shots at each other, and next thing you know, it ends in one way or another. But this really kind of goes.
I mean, if we think about this as a fight, if this was between people, what he's doing here is absolutely horrendous. This is something from In Search of Darkness we're seeing now. This is he's basically taking a sort of a large circular bit of drill,
tool.
Yeah, drilling into him.
Well, he's getting, what you give is what you get. This is what he did to Tony Perkins' character.
Yeah.
And now gone forever. We'll never see him again. Or is that the truth? Now, this is also, you got to take it sort of with a grain of salt that they can still breathe where they are here.
I'm going to go with the black hole was sucking everything in, including all the oxygen. So there's oxygen passing them as they're being sucked in. That's
what I thought. Oxygen pockets, definitely.
Yeah.
I think if anything, when you build big sets, there's a temptation to blow it up at the end. No. So there's probably not much left of the black hole in terms of sets.
No.
You probably have most or all of the matte paintings in storage somewhere. You may have the Cygnus and the Palomino and some of the costumes, but as for the on-set sets, pretty sure they're
maybe a Vincent, but that's probably about.
Yeah. I was always very proud of myself that I recognized Roddy McDowall's voice off the bat because I was such a Planet of the Apes fan. Well, obviously, he's done so much more, but at that point, he had done, not only Planet of the Apes, but the Fantastic Journey TV show. He was really a sci-fi staple, so it was very natural to be able to even recognize that and hear him.
Well, everyone's sad about Bob right now.
Aww.
Everyone in the Discord chat. Leanne, oh no, Bob. Sharon, that was sad. Lizard Man saying, they're the best, all right. You were the best, Bob. Yeah.
Pour one out for Bob. For poor Bob.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to go with Superman 4's sense of space at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I think when you're a kid, you're also not thinking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You're just like, you're following the action as it's happening. And, even then, no one's, I never once thought when I was a kid, well, they can't breathe. Well, clearly they can because they are on screen. So it works for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we were talking about the psychic connection that Kate McRae has with Vincent that sort of never comes back. If you do read the Ellen Dean Foster novelization, there's more of the psychic interplay. And there is sort of, and I won't spoil it because if you're interested in reading it, you should, but Ellen Dean Foster didn't know what was going to happen at the end of this movie either. So once they go into the black hole, he sort of wrote what he thought was happening, which was this sort of esoteric metaphysical kind of thing, but it does incorporate the psychic bond that Kate has with, well, Vincent and everybody. And it helps with their evolution of consciousness once they go through the black hole. And that's all I'll say about it. But it's interesting because it's different from what we get in the movie.
Do you know if when the movie was released there was any kind of religious backlash or anything?
There was religious backlash against the. There wasn't. There was religious backlash a little bit, but they wanted to get ahead of it. So the original ending that they shot, because they said, all right, we're at the end of production now, we need to figure something out. They go through the black hole, and the idea, because there's a close-up we'll see that goes right into Kate McRae's eye, they pull out, and it turns out that they've been in the Sistine Chapel where God creates man, God creates Adam, the two fingers. That's that moment, that touch point that they come out of. And they literally went to the Sistine Chapel, got permission, filmed there, put it together, and that was the ending. And it was very, very trippy. And they got cold feet. And they said the religious contingent is really, really going to push back on this. So they kind of did a little more of a fire and brimstone religious ending that was a little more cut and dry.
But that's the interesting thing about this. Again, if we look at its nearest counterpart, because it came out so close, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, they're both movies kind of playing with the concepts of God and creators, and it's very interesting that both movies would kind of gravitate towards that.
They shot this where they literally were. It's kind of like in the Last Starfighter. They were in a gyroscope kind of cage, and these guys, it's not the camera that's doing this, it's them. They're going around and around a couple times with some of these shots.
They could have filmed it on a ride they've got in Epcot called Mission Space, which is basically a centrifuge it puts you into. And I nearly threw up coming off the ride, and about 3 days later I walked past the ride and someone had thrown up coming off the ride. It's the most intense. It's the most intense ride Disney have ever created, and it's
I went on their. Here's the eye thing that they used in the movie, but what happens is different. That Mission to Mars ride is the most claustrophobic one that I will never go on again. Of all the cuddly Disney rides, there's some that I will never go near. And that one's claustrophobic because they were supposed to start right away, and then they didn't. And then I had to wait about 5 minutes before it started, and there's no way to say, let me out. All right, back to
the movie. So he's turned into Santa Claus.
Yes, his hair is all over, just floating and flopping around, and he has lost his mind.
Yeah. He's kind of merged with his creation.
Right. And I love this because, the ending is so bonkers. I asked everybody, and no one says it's supposed to make sense. If anything, Robert Forster said it's trippy. That's all I could say. Joseph Bottom said this is kind of like Fantasia, Night on Bald Mountain.
Strangely enough, the Maximilian was based on Chernbog from Fantasia. Was all the influences on the character.
But here, as an adult, when I look at this ending, I love how there is no room for interpretation. They are clearly in hell because you see the legions of the doomed, and wandering in the pits of hell. And
you can almost see that Reinhardt got his wish in a way. He basically became the ruler of hell.
Mm-hmm.
So he got his just reward. Maybe it's not the one he wanted, but he got his. I don't know, or is it to be interpreted that he's forced to witness all the terrible things in hell?
Well, I don't think he's ruling hell because there's one guy who's got that job. But I think there is no. It could be 1,000 interpretations. If anything, what I think is what's so shocking about this ending is this is what we're seeing. We're seeing they're clearly in hell. So you start to think, well, what's happening to the crew? Where are they going? Are they here as well? Because this is where you go. It's your portal to either up or down, through the black hole. And so when we do see, we're about to see it now, where the crew is going. Not only is it clearly, a gateway to a heaven or a heavenly place, but they really sell it with the floating angel going by.
So I know it's so the question I've got is, have they been transported to this place, or have they died?
We again up for interpretation, but the thing is, here we go. We've got the probe. It goes right outside, and now they're somewhere else. They've effectively gone through. Look at his eyebrow. That's real, by the way. That's not makeup. That's not real stitches. I remember once they got through, and I looked at my friend, and my friend looked at me, and we were 11 years old. When you see the shot of them and where they're going, we're still trying to make sense of what just happened. And he said, well, that was the black hole. Now, I'm trying to draw out my answer because we haven't seen it yet. What we ultimately see now, this is what my friend said, and I don't necessarily believe this. He said, now that's the white hole, and that's the sequel.
I'll go with that.
Because they're heading to the white hole now, but it's clearly a heavenly spot.
It does appear to be, but it's a very deep ending. But that was, again, maybe one of the problems that this movie had. I mean, we're just finishing the movie now as we're going through the credits. But again, this was one of the things of the movies of the era, as saying it was an older movie made too late, where sci-fi very much tended to have these kind of weird cerebral endings, especially in the sort of the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s, where we had sort of strange endings like Logan's Run and just everything that was just a bit different.
I must say, though, and this is my opinion, I would say that this wonky ending did not derail the movie. I think the movie, up until that point, is what it is, and people responded to what that was as the overall success or failure of what this whole project was. I wouldn't say the ending, threw off what was a good film up until then. Again, it's kind of the sum of its parts. Each part is amazing in its own way, arguably, or disappointing in its own way, arguably. But at the end of the day, you get what you get with the black hole. And to me, I talk about this movie 40 years later, especially because of that ending and because how dark it is and how mysterious it is, and it's much more of a haunted house movie than a Star Wars movie. It's more. It
really is. I mean, is that maybe one of the things that hurt this? Because I don't think anyone would have come out of this movie with the euphoric ending they would have had from Star Wars.
It's not an uplifting ending. It is happy, but it's not. No one's
it's not
medals.
Star Wars where you see all the characters getting medals, everyone's applauding. You see the character you thought died restored to glory, and everyone's cheering. And the Wookiee doesn't get a medal, but we'll let that slide for now. But that movie ends. Then it ends on a very uplifting score, and then you've got this that you come out thinking about it. Yes, it's a great film that it makes you think about it. But
well, you read the faces of everyone coming out of the theater when you're in waiting in line to be the next one in, and you see the faces coming out of the black hole, and you see a bunch of, I saw it, but they got poker faces, So I'm sure kids still enjoyed it, but I really myself, I scratched my head and I was just like, okay, I saw it now. I really wanted to see it, and I got to see it. It wasn't Star Wars, but nothing could be Star Wars. Okay, but it still had some cool stuff. But it wasn't forgotten. It really wasn't. No. I really did think about it.
No, but of course back then as well, we have to remember, you didn't have the opportunity to bounce theories of it off people on the other side of the planet like we can do now. You only had your local friend set to talk about such things, and if they weren't really into it so much, the conversation kind of ended there. You couldn't bounce theories off each other and discuss it as we're able to on these watch parties, and as we can do with these documentaries and all the amazing stuff we do, where he's connecting people from around the world with the community stuff to talk about a 40-year-old movie about a black hole with the guy from McHale's Navy in it. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I've got to say, David, thank you for joining us on this this Boxing Day show.
Yeah.
It's been so much fun. It's been absolutely brilliant. So, as everyone knows, you're very busy at the moment with the finishing touches to In Search of Tomorrow, and I think everyone can't wait to see that released.
Yeah, I'm very, 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 very excited for everyone to see this movie, because although the movie isn't like I can hand it to you done, the movie is essentially done. We're doing the polish on it now with graphics and colorization and sound and stuff like that. But the score is in, the final edit is locked. It's gonna, with credits, it's gonna be running about 5 hours, and you know, it's a 4-hour and 44-minute film. And then you got your credits, and there's lots to chew on. And if you liked In Search of Darkness Part 1 and Part 2, this is the same structure. I say that it's a little different from the horror stuff because there's a little more intellectual elements of dissection and discussion required for all these films, simply to just get it across and say, this is what the film is, and this is why we want to talk about X, Y, and Z, whether it's a moment from the behind the scenes or conceptually. But I'm so excited for everyone to see. I think it looks amazing. Samuel Way has edited yet another amazing film that just flies by.
It really does.
Paul Konchak is doing amazing graphics, and Weary Pines did a score that is different from what they've done in Search of Darkness Part 1 and 2. And it's a little more of a 80s spacey synth vibe going on with this. And I think it is very fun that everyone's going to enjoy.
I mean, I'm sworn to absolute secrecy, but as you know, I'm one of the chosen few who has seen an early cut of the documentary. I can't say anything about it apart from the audience, when they see the final cut, are going to have one hell of an amazing time watching it. It's a great fun movie documentary that everyone's going to love. If you love sci-fi, you're going to adore this. So I can't say any more, because what happens, Dave's actually got a button there. If I say too much, I get electrocuted. So absolutely sworn to secrecy, but it's not long now, guys. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful. Have a wonderful Christmas, what's left of it, for anyone else who's having it. Stay safe. Got New Year coming up. Everyone just be kind to each other. Stay safe. Have a great time. I'll be back next week with our In Search of Darkness community, and I will be bringing you the classic Shocker, which is going to be, yes, great film. But everyone, stay safe. I'll see you in 7 days. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. It's wonderful to see everyone. Happy holidays, and thanks for hanging with us for the Black Hole.